Hi everyone, this is Counseling 4500, Chapter 4, Psychoanalytic Therapy. Alright, so we saw in class already the product commercial. If you have not, please feel free to click on the link and then view. But now that we're starting out with all of the different therapeutic frameworks, I want to remind that you should all read the summary at the beginning of each chapter that introduces the psychologist for that specific chapter in theory. All right, Freud's work influences contemporary psychology. So one of the things that we need to establish is the fact that he basically is the one who is the father, the founding person of psychology. So basic concepts are still part of the foundation that other theorists base their frameworks on. So you can see a lot of his stuff is referenced with all the other therapies. Some expand, others are modified, and some are against Freudian or psychoanalytic therapy. Psychoanalytic system is a model of personality development and an approach to psychotherapy. It talks a lot about the unconscious and is the first therapeutic procedure for understanding and modifying the structures of one's basic character. So overall, what that is basically saying is that whenever you hear people talk about psychology, this is kind of where it came from. Whatever theory that you hear, there's a way for you to trace it back to Freud. Okay. And the other thing is, I just want to make sure you all understand is whenever you hear the word psychoanalytic or psychodynamic, it usually means Freud or Freudian ideas. Okay. All right, key concepts. View of the human nature, it is deterministic. Our behavior is determined by irrational forces, unconscious motivations, biological and instinctual drives in the first years of our lives, also known as his psychosexual stages. So let's start to define some of these words because some of it, we might think we know, but in psychology terms or in counseling terms, it might actually be defined a little bit differently. So instincts are central to the Freudian approach. So when you think of instincts, you're kind of feeling like, the things that kind of like drive you, right? So originally the word was libido and it was later changed to life instincts. So those are things that are kind of like inside you that are natural, that are kind of very primal, okay? Survival of the person and the human race, growth, development, and creativity. So we think about a sexual drive or a sexual instinct. That's basically our body saying, we need to have sex so that we can have babies. Obviously, in modern days, as humans, we have the options if we don't want to. But for almost pretty much every creature in general, there is a drive to mate and then to reproduce, right? So these are kind of like those primal original drives that keep a species alive. It may start off as a sexual energy, but moves past that. A lot of it is about gaining pleasure and avoiding pain. So you'll also notice is that oftentimes when it comes to these drives, it's about, having fun, surviving, and getting away from all the stuff that's kind of like boring or bad or whatever it is. So there are also death instincts or aggressive drives. There's also unconscious wish to die or to hurt themselves as well. And we can start to expand on those as we go along. So the structure of personality, there are three systems, and I'm sure you're all familiar with it, which is the id, the ego, and the superego. So those are three components that will go into the next slide. But if you have not seen the video, we watched it in class already, which is about the id, the ego, and the superego at the beach. All right, the first one is the id, all the untamed drives or impulses that is connected to the biological component. So untamed, right? Kind of like that primal stuff. It's not things that have gone through and realized that there are rules. These are things that just happen kind of instinctually inside of us. It's considered the original system of personality. At birth, people are all id. Mostly unconscious. So basically, if you think about when you're a baby, you're not having reason or anything like that. You are like, I'm hungry, I'm going to start crying. I'm hungry, I'm going to start to grab with my fingers, or I'm going to kick or, scream and all those things. Those are, nothing, this is not necessarily ruled by manners or anything. Those are just primal things that you are aware of when you are born. It lacks organization. It's blind, demanding, and insistent. It has to discharge tension immediately. So when it says that, it's kind of like, I'm hungry, so feed me now, right? Ruled by the pleasure principle. And it's about reducing the tension, avoiding any pain, and gaining pleasure whenever you can. It is illogical. So basically, that means it's like, it doesn't necessarily need to make sense. It just wants whatever it wants. It's amoral and driven to satisfy instinctual needs. Never matures, remaining the spoiled brat, and does not think, only wishes or acts. So again, very primal is the id. The next is the ego. Organizes and mediates between the id and its list of realistic dangers or impulses. Has contact with the external world. So this one now is talking about the fact that this part considers what's going on in the community or the society. Governs, controls, and regulates the personality, kind of like a traffic cop. So now it's starting to understand that there are rules and how to behave in this world that we live in. It mediates between the instinct and the surrounding environment. So whatever is inside you, you kind of want to do, right? These instinctual drives we're talking about, like say id. But it also knows that you cannot just do whatever you want in a society, or otherwise it might be very chaotic, and stuff like that. So it controls it controls the conscious and exercises censorship. So censorship is basically when you kind of prevent yourself from just doing anything. You want to be aware of what's going on, what is appropriate, which is why like things are censored, is because let's say people think that this is inappropriate for children, so we'll censor it, right? So now it's behaving in a moral way. It's known as the reality principle, realistic and logical thinking, and formulates plans of action for reaching those needs. Intelligent and rational, checks and controls the blind impulses of the id. So again, it references the id, that it checks and controls it. Can tell the difference between imagination, such as the mental images, and then also what is seen in the reality of the world, which is the external world. The superego is the third one. It's an internalized social component. The expectations of parental figures. So oftentimes people will say that the superego is kind of the justice part, like, how to behave, and those are rules and the way that you're supposed to act in the world, which are often instilled by your family members or your parents. It's very much of a moral code. Are your actions good or bad, right or wrong? Usually you think about those things from your superego. It represents the ideal and strives for perfection. So it's like what you should properly do, right? Traditional values and ideas of society parent to the child. It tries to stop the id, and it tells them to go move from moral goals to more realistic goals, perfection. Rewards pride and self-love, and if you are punishing, you're going to feel guilt and you're going to feel inferior. All right, conscious and unconscious is another really brilliant idea when it comes to Freud. Keys to understanding behavior and the problems of personality. The unconscious cannot be studied directly. We only see it from the behaviors. So if you think about, when people say, do I really know who you are? Oftentimes it's because you act a certain way that everyone can see. But inside, in your brain, in your heart, you might be thinking different things. And then as people get to know you, they're going to go, oh, are you matching up or not, right? So there's an unconscious side of all of us that a lot of us don't know. And what he's also saying is sometimes you're not aware of these things either. And by going to therapy, hopefully your therapist will help reveal those things so that you are becoming more conscious of the unconscious stuff. So here are the ways in which the unconscious and the conscious is studied in Freud. Dreams, symbolic of unconscious needs, wishes, and conflicts. So sometimes we want things in our lives, but we cannot admit to it. So it comes into us in dreams and metaphors and all that other stuff, and symbols, basically. Slips of the tongue and forgetting. So sometimes you really do want something, but you're trying to hold yourself from doing it. But then sometimes when you talk, you actually oops, and you say something that really shows us really who, maybe potentially, what you want. 3 is a post-hypnotic suggestion. So that one is kind of like, once you're under hypnotism, although we don't really talk a lot about hypnotism in psychology today, although it does exist. Also, that could potentially also show us what's going on in your unconsciousness. Four, material derived from free association techniques. So, free association basically means there are no rules. So, the therapist might say something like, just say whatever the first word comes into your head, right? So, we're not trying to structure it in any way. We just want your brain, your mind to just say the things that it wants to say. And then from there, the therapist can listen to it, maybe hear if there are any emerging patterns or themes that emerge from all of that. All right, number five is material derives from projective techniques. So projective techniques, we already talked about that. Probably the most famous projective technique or assessment is the Rorschach, which is like an ink blot test. And what it is kind of like either very abstract patterns or drop, kind of almost looks like coffee stains, right? Or ink blots, obviously. Or it could actually be like a picture or two of a scene, and then we ask you to interpret what it means to you. Six is in symbolic content of psychotic symptoms. So again, that is sometimes, for some of us, there might be some psychotic episodes. A Freudian person might look into that and see what's going on there, because it might be seen as something that's not controlled by you, but maybe something in your unconscious that is controlling it. Consciousness is a small part of the mind. The larger part exists below the surface or awareness. So like I said before, when it came to we kind of see who you are outside. If you look at the next slide, it's an iceberg. And typically most of an iceberg is actually below the water. So if you're sailing your ship, you're not necessarily going to see that big, massive under part of the same iceberg. You just see the top part. You're like, oh yeah, that's an iceberg. But when you look at it, it is really massive underneath. And so Freud uses that as a way to kind of explain how we are as a person and what's going on as a human being. Unconscious stores all the experiences, memories, and repressed materials, needs and motivations that are inaccessible. So those are things that you really want, but you might not necessarily know why and stuff like that. How you psychologically function exists outside of that awareness. So because you have all these things, sometimes it affects how you behave, right? So it's going to be a study of behavior, your unconsciousness, your consciousness. Psychoanalytic therapy is to make the unconscious motivations conscious so that you can make a choice. So what we're hoping for when it comes to Freudian or psychodynamic theory or psychoanalytic theory is that, we want to make sure that you're aware of what's going on. And then from there, you can kind of decide what to do next when it comes to your behaviors. Need to cling to old patterns, such as repetitions, must be worked through. So sometimes we don't know why we do the things that we do. And by going to therapy this way, hopefully you'll figure it out, uncover it. And then from there, you understand a little bit more about yourself. All right, like I said before, this is a slide of an iceberg. So as you can see, this is why Titanic probably sank, because there was a really massive iceberg underneath, but it doesn't look really massive if you're sailing on the surface of the water, right? So it's something that you want to think about. So anxiety, feeling of dread that results from repressed feelings, memories, desires, and experience that emerge to the surface of awareness. So what that is basically saying is, when you do bring things that are from your unconscious to your consciousness, you start to feel a little weird, okay? And that could be because of, that process of understanding who you are and seeing who you are, and that's that anxiety. This is how Freudian psychoanalytic psychodynamic typically sees it. States of tension that motivates us to do something. So now we're aware of what's going on. So now we know why we're doing the things we're doing. And then sometimes we're like, well, why are we doing those things? So it comes from the conflict of the id, the ego, and the superego. And it warns us of impending danger, which is like, your gut instinct saying, ooh, this is kind of weird, this is kind of scary. And so you have this anxiety. All right, there are three types. There's the reality anxiety, which is a fear of danger from the external world. So realistic things that can happen, and then you get scared or you have anxiety. And then there's also neurotic anxiety, which is fear that the instincts will get out of hand and cause one to do something and get punished. So this is kind of like you're overthinking it. You're being overwhelmed. This is this neurotic anxiety. So you're really afraid, like, oh my gosh, what happens if someone thinks of this, and then I'm gonna get in trouble. So you start to build yourself in and overwhelm yourself with this anxiety. There's also moral anxiety, fear of one's own conscience. People who have a well-developed conscience tend to feel guilty when they do something against their moral code. So let's say that someone knows, it's not really good to, let's say, tattletale, but you did it anyways, and now you feel really bad about it because you know that you shouldn't tattletale, but for some reason you did anyways because your sister, was a brat to you or whatever. So that's like that moral anxiety that some of us cannot handle. So when when the ego cannot control our anxiety by rational and direct methods, it relies on indirect methods called ego defense behaviors. All right, when it comes to ego defense mechanisms or ego defense behaviors, this video right here is just a sample of a psychologist who kind of acts out each of those things. Please feel free to click on it and then view it. But it helps a person cope with anxiety and prevent the ego from being overwhelmed. So what happens is you might feel a lot of anxiety about something or really stressed out about something. So what you do is you use an ego defense mechanism to kind of like make it so that it kind of is out of your mind for a little bit. Okay. So that's what we're talking about here. Normal behaviors that can have adaptive value as long as it does not become a permanent way to confront the world. So what that is saying is it's fine for us to all use these ego defense mechanisms that we're about to learn. We all use them. But the problem is you need to also deal with these anxieties and these problems. But if you keep on just using ego defense mechanisms over and over and over and over again, for example, denial, right, which is basically saying, oh, it doesn't exist, for your whole life, you're not really dealing with the world. You're not dealing with reality. You're not dealing with the facts. And so that can be very unhealthy. And this is why some of your clients come into therapy. All right, you can either deny or distort reality, or it can operate on an unconscious level. So if you avoid it or whatever, it can then start to move around and affect you quite a bit. However, we hope that most of us, when we're stressed out or whatever about a specific thing, we might say, oh, you know what? I'm not even going to deal with it right now. So you're moving it to the side, right? But you do know, as a person who is mature and experienced in life, you're going to say, oh, but I will eventually have to deal with it. So then you'll deal with it and then you can move along. But there are some people who will use one ego defense mechanism after the other for their entire lives. And that can be very, very dangerous and harmful for that person. So here are some that are listed, or here are the ones that are listed in the textbook. You will see examples where the words might be a little bit different in other, let's say, online or other books. Just know that they're kind of similar. Most of them are pretty much similar. But again, depending on where these people got these words, but these are the ones that are listed in the book. Number 1 is repression. Number 2 is denial. Number 3 is reaction formation. Number 4 is projection. Number 5 is displacement. Number 6 is rationalization. Number 7 is sublimation. Number 8 is regression. Number 9 is introjection. Number 10 is identification. And number 11 is compensation. So just to let you know, in our Canvas page, I did upload a sheet with each of these, the definition and example. Actually, there's a couple of examples for some of them. So there's 2 downloads that you can, and I think we discussed that in class already. So please look at those and look at the examples so you understand what each of those things are. Okay? So this is the end of the first section of Freud.